The atmosphere in the Capitol conference room was tense. Kevin McCarthy stood at the head of the long mahogany table, arms folded, jaw clenched. Around him sat a mixture of uneasy aides and tight-lipped Republican lawmakers. Pam Bondi, however, sat upright, hands folded neatly, her eyes locked directly on McCarthy. "You've become a liability, Pam," McCarthy finally said, his voice low but sharp. "We've taken hits because of your last two statements. The committee's bleeding. We need to regroup." Pam didn't blink. "I'm asking you to resign," he continued. "Today." A folder slid down the table, her prepared resignation letter. Silent. Final. Bondi glanced at it, then slowly reached forward. She picked it up with delicate fingers, inspected the signature line, and then, without breaking eye contact, she tore the paper in half. Then into quarters. Then into confetti. The room froze. Without hesitation, she stood. Slapped the shredded resignation onto the polished table. Then came a deafening bang as she pounded her fist into the wood, making two interns flinch. "You want silence. You want submission. You'll get neither from me." McCarthy's face went pale. Silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the soft flutter of the torn resignation drifting across the desk like fallen leaves. Kevin McCarthy stood motionless, clearly not expecting such open defiance, especially in front of witnesses. Aides exchanged nervous glances. One staffer subtly reached to stop a recording device, but Bondi's eyes snapped to him. "Leave it on," she said coldly. "Let the world hear exactly how this goes down." McCarthy's jaw tightened. "You're making a scene." "I'm making a point," Bondi snapped back. "You don't get to scapegoat me because you've lost control of the narrative. I didn't start the fire. I'm the only one trying to contain it." A low murmur spread through the room. Representative Vaughn cleared his throat. "Pam, maybe we should take a recess." "No." She leaned forward on both hands, her voice steady now. "I'm not walking out the back door like a guilty intern. I stood with this party when it mattered. I cleaned up the messes no one else had the stomach for." McCarthy tried to reassert control, his voice sharp. "You're endangering the coalition. We need discipline, you need a fall guy," Bondi interrupted. "But I didn't come to Washington to play fall girl." Her words sliced through the room like a razor. Outside the conference doors, whispers had already started. Aides texted frantically. One major outlet's push alert had just buzzed on 4 phones simultaneously. Pam Bondi defies McCarthy in closed-door showdown. By the time Bondi left the room, the damage was done. Reporters were already hounding her in the corridor, microphones thrust in her face like bayonets. "Ms. Bondi, did you just refuse to resign? Is it true you destroyed your resignation letter in front of Kevin McCarthy? Are you splitting from House leadership?" She didn't answer. Not yet. Back inside the conference room, Kevin McCarthy leaned over the table, seething. "Who leaked it?" he growled. No one responded, but everyone knew. Cameras weren't allowed in that room, yet somehow Bondi's rebellion was already headline news. A photo had even surfaced, Bondi mid-slam, her hand still on the desk, eyes burning with defiance. "She's playing this like a campaign," one aide muttered. McCarthy turned to Representative Hannah Lowell, a Bondi ally. "If she wants to start a war, she better be ready to finish it." Lowell gave a thin smile. "Oh, she's ready. Question is, are you?" Meanwhile, Bondi stepped into her private office and closed the door behind her. She let out a long breath, eyes scanning her phone as notification after notification poured in, text messages from political operatives, former prosecutors, governors, and even 2 senators. Ballsy. "They're scared. Call me if you're going rogue." She smiled slightly. The Beltway had underestimated her. Again. Her chief of staff poked her head in. "They're circling. You want to issue a statement?" Pam looked up. Calm. Unshaken. Yeah. Let's give them something to chew on. 10 minutes later, Pam Bondi stood behind a podium in front of a row of American flags. A hastily assembled group of press had gathered, cameras locked in, recorders running. She wasn't flanked by colleagues. No security detail. Just her, standing alone, unapologetic. "My name is Pam Bondi," she began clearly. "And I am not resigning." Flashes burst across the room. "I was asked today, ordered, actually, to submit my resignation for being too disruptive. Let me be perfectly clear, disruption is not a flaw when the ship is sinking. It's a lifeline." Behind the scenes, McCarthy's office scrambled. His communications team tried drafting a counter-statement, but no one could agree on the tone. Attack her? Downplay it? Ignore it? Nothing would land right now. She had seized the narrative. Pam continued, her tone growing sharper. "I've spent my career fighting corruption, exposing lies, and pushing back against the good old boy routine that still grips too much of this town. If that makes some people uncomfortable, they're welcome to leave. I won't." Reporters leaned in. Phones buzzed again. "I don't answer to backroom politics," she said, pausing deliberately. "I answer to the people who put me here. And if anyone has a problem with that, I suggest they come say it to my face." She stepped away from the mic. No questions. No spin. Outside the building, the clip was already going viral. A trending hashtag emerged by the hour's end, hashtag Bondi Won't Back Down. Across town. Kevin McCarthy sat in his office with the doors shut, lights dimmed, two advisors pacing in silence. The statement had hit like a political earthquake, and the aftershocks weren't stopping. Bondi's clip had been replayed on every major outlet, conservative and liberal alike. Even some of his own donors had texted with veiled praise for her boldness. "She's flipped it on you," one aide muttered, scrolling his phone. "You look like you're panicking." "I'm not panicking," McCarthy snapped, though his voice said otherwise. "I'm regrouping." He stood up and walked to the window, hands in his pockets, watching the Capitol dome through the thick glass. "She just declared war," the second advisor said. "You going to let her run wild?" McCarthy turned slowly. "No. We take off the gloves." That night, a smear campaign began to take shape. Selective leaks. Out-of-context quotes. Old allies quietly encouraged to reconsider their support for Bondi. News outlets were fed headlines designed to chip away at her rising support. By morning, a few hit pieces surfaced. But Bondi saw them coming. She called a private meeting in a nondescript Georgetown townhouse with a handful of trusted insiders, former prosecutors, media veterans, a pollster, and one sitting senator. The energy in the room was electric. "They think they're going to bury me with whispers and recycled drama," Bondi said calmly. "But I've been in this game too long." One advisor leaned forward. "Then we go bigger." She nodded. "We go louder. I want everything they're trying to bury, exposed. We're not on defense. We're on offense now." Someone passed her a file. She opened it, eyes narrowing. Inside were names. Meetings. Quiet deals. Things that weren't supposed to see daylight. She smiled. "They should have just let me walk away." 3 days later, the Capitol woke to a political thunderclap. Pam Bondi released a 12-page dossier, publicly. No paywall, no redactions, just a clean PDF titled, "The Silence Protocol, What They Never Wanted You to See." Inside were detailed notes from closed-door meetings, anonymous testimonies from whistleblowers, and even calendar screenshots implicating several high-ranking House members in a shadowy strategy group known informally as the 17 Club. Among the listed names, 3 sitting committee chairs, 1 former speaker, and a direct link to a political action fund McCarthy had long denied coordinating with. Within an hour, her document trended worldwide. Congressional staffers scrambled. Phones rang off the hook. Pam's name surged on every platform as the media tore through the explosive claims like wildfire. At a midday press conference, McCarthy looked drained. He tried to dismiss the leak as theatrics, but the press wasn't buying it. "Congressman McCarthy, were you ever present at a 17 Club meeting? Are you aware of donor channeling through third-party organizations? Will you be requesting an ethics review into your own activities?" Bondi, meanwhile, was on a plane. Destination, Florida. She had an event lined up in her home state, a symbolic return to the base. The venue was packed. Cameras flashed. Supporters chanted. But she didn't gloat. She stood in front of the crowd with that same resolute energy. "I told them I wasn't resigning. They didn't listen. So now. I'll make sure they hear me every day." Cheers erupted. Back in Washington, the Republican leadership huddled behind closed doors again, this time not to silence her, but to discuss survival. McCarthy finally said what he hadn't dared to say aloud: "She's not just a problem now. She's a movement." The party was splitting, and fast. Overnight, Bondi's message had found unexpected traction, not just among conservative populists, but also with independents and even a few progressives who admired her refusal to be muzzled by her own party. Several younger lawmakers quietly reached out. One even called her directly. "I'm not saying I agree with everything," he said cautiously. "But you did what most of us are too afraid to do." Bondi wasn't surprised. She had counted on the quiet discontent simmering beneath the surface for months, discontent with leadership that demanded obedience while ignoring the rot behind closed doors. Meanwhile, the 17 Club became the subject of a preliminary ethics probe. House Minority Whip Elijah Burns tried to contain the damage, but couldn't ignore the memo from the Office of Congressional Oversight. Formal review recommended. Allegations involve misuse of leadership PACs. Kevin McCarthy's internal circle began to fray. His own chief of staff took an unplanned leave. Two prominent donors issued veiled public statements calling for new direction and ethical clarity within House leadership. In a private call with an ally, McCarthy reportedly vented, "She's turning this into a purge." That night, Bondi went live on national TV, no teleprompter, no notes, just a clear voice and a piercing message. They called it loyalty. What they meant was silence. What they demanded was obedience. "What they'll never get from me, is permission to keep lying." Her poll numbers shot through the roof. And somewhere in a private Capitol Hill bar, a junior congressman turned to his colleague and said what many were now whispering: "She's not fighting the party anymore. She's remaking it." By the end of the week, Pam Bondi had done the unthinkable. She had made herself a threat not just to Kevin McCarthy, but to the entire establishment. From both sides. Old guard Republicans whispered about disciplinary action. Several Democrats quietly signaled concern too, not because they supported her, but because her crusade was gaining ground outside the system. She had struck a nerve with voters tired of polished speeches and behind-the-curtain deals. Bondi's next move? A town hall in Pennsylvania. Deep Purple territory. Hundreds showed up, some in MAGA hats, others in Union jackets. All curious. All restless. She didn't pull punches. They told me to sit down. I stood up. They told me to shut up. I spoke louder. And now they're telling you to ignore me, because the moment you start listening, they lose control. Thunderous applause followed. But not everyone was clapping. Back in D.C., a coalition of top Republican officials convened a closed strategy session. No press. No leaks. Phones locked in boxes outside the door. "She's playing with fire," one senator muttered. "No, she is the fire," said another. That night, Bondi received a message. Not a phone call. A typed letter. Anonymous. Slid under the door of her hotel suite. It read, "You've made your point. Stop now, or we'll stop it for you. No signature. No logo. Just a subtle threat. Pam held the letter for a long moment, then calmly folded it in half and threw it into the trash. She picked up her phone and texted her chief of staff, "Let's double security. And book Arizona next." Phoenix was boiling, both from the desert heat and the political fever surrounding Pam Bondi's arrival. What started as a modest campaign-style stop exploded into a full-scale event. Nearly 5,000 showed up. A makeshift stage was built in a high school football stadium. Local news outlets scrambled to cover it. Bondi's team, now operating like a shadow campaign, kept tight control over the message, the perimeter, and the optics. But something felt different in Arizona. The crowds weren't just restless, they were energized. Veterans, independents, disillusioned Republicans, and even former Democrats held signs that read, "Truth over titles, SHE doesn't blink, we back Bondi." Backstage, her staff briefed her. "Multiple news anchors from DC are here. And, so is a donor from the Goldwater Legacy Network." Pam raised an eyebrow. Interesting. But the real surprise came mid-event, when a retired congressman from her own party took the stage unannounced. He didn't need an intro. He simply said, "I served 30 years. I never saw anyone face the machine like this. Whether you love her or hate her, what she's doing is the first honest thing this town has seen in decades." The crowd roared. Then Bondi stepped up. And this time, she didn't just talk about corruption, she named names. She exposed more from the 17 Club documents. She read excerpts from emails. She pointed directly at the Capitol and said, "They tried to silence me because they were scared of what I might uncover. Well, now you've all seen it, and we're just getting started." Cheers. Chants. Flashing lights. Back in DC, a veteran strategist watching the live stream turned to his partner and muttered the 5 words everyone in power was thinking but not saying, "She's not backing down anymore." The morning after the Arizona rally, Washington was in chaos. Kevin McCarthy's office was flooded with calls, not from journalists, but from lawmakers, lobbyists, and panicked donors. Bondi's latest document dump had hit harder than expected. It contained not just names and dates, but bank transfers, meeting locations, and internal memos. And worse, the documents were authenticated. An emergency meeting was scheduled with senior leadership. The topic? Containment strategy, Operation Iron Lid. "They want her gone," McCarthy said grimly. Not quieted, erased. But no one knew how. Every move against Bondi had backfired spectacularly. Public opinion kept swinging in her favor. Even opposition voices hesitated, attacking her now made it seem like you had something to hide. Meanwhile, Pam was already back in DC and preparing her boldest play yet. A formal ethics complaint. She walked into the Capitol, flanked by 2 legal advisors and a former inspector general, and hand-delivered a sealed document to the Office of Congressional Oversight. Reporters shouted questions. She didn't stop. Minutes later, a breaking news alert lit up every screen. Bondi files ethics complaint against senior House leaders, cites coordinated deception and donor fraud. That was the final blow. Several moderate Republicans publicly distanced themselves from McCarthy. A handful quietly began discussing a vote of no confidence. Some even whispered about drafting Bondi for a higher role. And then came the line no one expected to see, published in Politico that night. Sources suggest early talks of a Bondi-led faction forming a breakaway caucus, potentially a new party platform. Inside her office, Pam sat in silence, staring at the news on her phone. Her chief of staff waited for instructions. "Do we deny it?" Pam smiled faintly. "No. We don't deny anything anymore." The Capitol hadn't seen a shakeup like this in decades. In just under 4 weeks, Pam Bondi had gone from a sidelined figure to the most disruptive, and magnetic, force in modern politics. The media dubbed her the reluctant reformer. But by now, it was clear, she wasn't reluctant anymore. On the House floor, whispers turned into open rebellion. 5 GOP members resigned their committee appointments. One prominent chairperson switched affiliation to Independent Reform Conservative, a phrase not officially recognized, but now echoing across headlines. McCarthy's team pushed for a private resolution, but it was too late. The votes were being counted. Bondi stood in front of a row of microphones once again. Calm. Unmoved. And with full intent. "I didn't plan for any of this," she began. "But when the curtain got pulled back, I had a choice: walk away quietly, or turn around and light the place up." She paused. "You already know what I chose." Applause erupted, not just outside, but in small pockets of the chamber itself. Reformist Republicans. Independents. Even 2 Democrats stood silently, arms crossed, acknowledging something few had the courage to admit publicly: she had broken the machine. That afternoon, Kevin McCarthy called an emergency press conference. His eyes were tired, his tone defeated. "I'm stepping down as House Minority Leader. Effective immediately. No apology. No fight. Just the thud of resignation." And Pam? She didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. Instead, she returned to her office, closed the door, and looked out at the Capitol dome one last time before whispering to herself, "Now the real work begins."